Last week we looked at the first three worldviews: theism, atheism, and deism. And I would say theism and atheism are two of the most widely held views in America. But also today we're going to be looking at four other worldviews. We're going to be looking at finite godism, pantheism, panentheism, and polytheism. And again, all these views are held. They're still held today. But out of these four we're looking at today, pantheism would definitely be the most widely held view worldwide of those four that we're looking at today. And so that's the one we're really going to hone in on. And again, I have a chart on the back side that we're going to go through that sort of helps you to compare and contrast the different worldviews. If you didn't get outlined, there's still extra outlines from last week too. If you weren't here and you want to outline, that has the chart we looked at last week that compares theism, atheism, and deism. So again, the book I'm using or drawing this information and these charts from is called the Baker Encyclopedia of Apologetics. And it is a huge book. We have it in our library. I think it's over 1,000 pages. I think Scott has. Scott, you have that book, don't you? It's just a great resource, for evangelism and apologetics. And if you want to know what different worldviews are, what different views are related to, evolution. I mean, you take any topic that you discuss in evangelism, and he covers it pretty much. And Norm Geisler is with the Lord. I believe he's a Calvinist now. Now that he's in heaven, he's sitting with R.C. and Jonathan Edwards and Luther and Calvin, and they're, drinking their pint of godly beer. He's a Calvinist now. But anyway, he's very helpful in apologetics. But another guy that I want you to, I wrote this yesterday, but Peter Jones is another guy you should be familiar with. Peter Jones is still alive and well. He's a scratch golfer. I always say he's a scratch golfer because I got to play golf with him and he just beat the tar off me. Guy's a really good golfer. He said when he first came to the United States in the 60s, every golf course that was near him, wherever he taught, it was free for pastors. And he said, no wonder this is the greatest country in the world, because he came over from England. And he was just shocked that everywhere you went, if you were a pastor, you got to play for free. Well, times has changed. That's not the case. But anyway, Peter Jones, good friend of R.C. Sproul. He married Edmund Clowney's daughter, who was the president at Westminster Seminary. He had his PhD from Harvard, very smart guy. But he's probably the foremost expert on worldview in the world today. All his books have to do with worldview, and his particular expertise is paganism in Bible times, in both the Hebrew Old Testament and the New Testament. And then what he does is he takes what those beliefs were and he shows how really they're not much different today, that modern day paganism is really the same as it's always been, but it has different names and there's different cults that adhere to these things. But modern paganism is alive and well. So if you want to know what that is, here's 3 books that I wrote down. He's written about 20 books all on this subject. Every single one of them is on this subject. But some of the ones that are really helpful and to start with would be, one's called The Gnostic Empire Strikes Back. And it's basically sort of a takeoff on the whole Star Wars thing. But again, just talking about, he narrows down worldviews to 1 or 2. So he's got a book called 1 or 2. And he's got another book called The Other Worldview, because basically in his mind, in his idea of worldviews, it comes down to either you worship the creator or you worship the creation. And when you worship the creation, that has a variety of different systems of worship. But essentially all worldviews are either that there is a God, the theistic God, or it's something other. And if it's something other, then ultimately you're worshiping the creation. So he makes a big deal about that. So he's got the other worldview, another book called One or Two, and a great book called Gospel Truth, Pagan Lies, which was especially helpful with what we're talking about today in relationship to pantheism. Again, pantheism, if I had to guess what is the most popular worldview, what is the most widely held worldview in Marin County, it would be pantheism, hands down. So we're going to look a little bit at that again today. Okay, so if you look in your outlines, there's 7 major worldviews, and this is all from Geisler. He says each is unique with one exception, pantheism or polytheism. No one can consistently believe in more than one worldview because the central premises are mutually exclusive. Logically, only one worldview can be true. The 7 major worldviews are theism, atheism, deism, which we looked at last week, and today we'll be examining finite godism, pantheism, panentheism, and polytheism. And by the way, of these 4, panentheism is on the rise in liberal seminaries and colleges. So when we talk about open theism came from process theology, which came from panentheism. And this is the whole idea that God does not know the future. God is not omniscient. So if you pray to God, you really have no idea what he's going to do because he doesn't know what he's going to do. He's sort of got to weigh it out. And unfortunately, that's taught in a lot of seminaries and Bible colleges today. And you know, one of the biggest promoters of this is IVP, InterVarsity Press, which is insane because they used to be really solid. But they actually promote all the books that Greg Boyd writes, who's the most widely read person in this area of open theism. And to me, it's blatant heresy and has no place in Christianity. It shouldn't have any place in Christianity, but it does, thanks to people like InterVarsity. Okay, so importance of a worldview. Well, worldviews influence personal meaning and values, the way people act and think. The most important question a worldview answers is, where did we come from? The answer to this question is crucial to how other questions are answered. Theism declares that God created us. Creation was from nothing, the Latin phrase ex nihilo. Pantheism holds we emanated from God, like rays from the sun or sparks from a fire. So again, and because of that, there's no distinction between us and God. And there's no distinction between anything, because everything is God, according to pantheism. Okay, so that's the oneism. You know, when he talks about one or two, oneism is what the world holds to. And the reason that's significant, like, again, one of the biggest issues of our day is gender identity, and how many genders are there and that kind of thing. Well, that's where this comes from. That's where this comes from. And the reason is because pantheists want everything to be one. They don't want distinctions. So to have a male-female distinction to them is deplorable. They don't want two, they want one. And they want everything to become one. So if you go against that oneist philosophy, they don't like that. It's repulsive to them. Because you're basically denying the reality that all is God and all is one. And that's their mantra. So this is why Maronites that are pantheists are very, what do I want to say, hostile to Christianity. Okay. All right. So after that, pantheism holds we emanated from God like rays from the sun or sparks from a fire. Creation is out of God himself, ex deo. The others play on some form of these understandings with nuances of difference. A particular understanding influences a person's view of death, for example. This should be a theist, not a thesis. Okay? A theist believes in personal immortality. An atheist generally does not. For the theist, death is a beginning. For the pantheist, death is the cessation of one life and the beginning of another. So all pantheists hold to reincarnation. Okay? But it's basically you're going from one life to another based on how you lived this current life. That's why in India, and the ramifications of this are really big. In India, a lot of people, there are people every year that starve to death who are watching cows walk right in front of them. Cows, chickens, they see fish in the water. And yet they starve to death. Why? Because they would be eating somebody's life. They would be cannibalistic. That's what they think. That's their view. So to them, it's repulsive to hear anybody that eats meat because you're eating something that was alive that you killed that now is another life form. And anyway, but you see the ramifications of that because when you go to India, if any of you have ever been to India, in my opinion, it's the hardest place I've ever had to be because you see the ramifications of the fall like no other place that I've been to. Where children will be maimed by their parents in Calcutta for sympathy. They literally cut off fingers, ears, they gouge eyeballs out. And how do I know that? Because I saw it all in India, in Calcutta. They do that to gain sympathy from foreigners because Hindus won't help you. Yeah. Right. This is part of your karma. Okay, so it's really, again, worldviews have ramifications. They really do. And I think pantheism has one of the worst, as far as I've seen. Atheism's, I would say, the worst worldview because of people like Stalin and Hitler and so forth. Again, people have absolutely no value in atheism, where at least in Hinduism, people have some value, but there's a hierarchy of value based on your karma, and you suffer accordingly due to what you've sown, you reap. Okay, all right. Theists believe we were created by God with the purpose to eternally fellowship with and worship God. Pantheists believe we will eventually lose all individual identity in God. What one believes about the future will influence how he or she lives now. In classical theism, we only come this way once. Again, Hebrews 9:27 is an important verse for you to memorize, especially if you're dealing with anybody who holds to a New Age view, because Hebrews 9:27 says it is destined for man to die once, and after that, face the judgment. So once. There's no recurring life forms like reincarnation teaches. Okay, so life takes on a certain sobriety and urgency it would not have for one who believes in reincarnation, which is the rebirth of a soul in a new body, a person or animal in whom a particular soul is believed to have been reborn. He is said to be a reincarnation of the Hindu god Vishnu. The urgency there is to deal with bad karma, so the next life will be a step up. But there are always more chances in future lives to try and try again. A virtuous act is given different meanings by the various worldviews. Now, again, one of the good things about Hinduism in this sense is you're being a good person because your next life depends on it. So at least Hindus, by and large, if you know anybody who's Hindu, they tend to be pretty kind, good people in the sense of how they treat others. They're not out there murdering people. You know, they tend to be very religious because their next life depends on it. Okay, so it depends on them. Yeah.
But isn't it interesting that they're not really being virtuous. Wouldn't being virtuous to help someone who is down there
Right.
and nothing, but the caste system
Right.
puts them back from doing the very thing they should be doing.
Right. Yeah, again,
weird.
but it's like anything that's not true.
Right.
It has inconsistencies. That's why Christianity is so compelling, because there's so much everything is consistent. There's no contradictions in Christianity. There's paradoxes, there's things that are mysterious, like the Trinity, but they're not contradictions. And when you put it all together, it's very compelling as a whole worldview, because it all coheres. So, yeah. But again, that's the great hope of Christianity, is like we know, for instance, like you look at Hinduism and how horrible it is for the people that are starving to death, for instance. And again, as a good Hindu, you can't do anything about that because you would be messing with somebody's karma. But for a Christian, that's why so many Christians are over there, helping people and feeding people and caring for and starting hospitals and so forth. So Christianity does do more good for the world than any other religion, by far, hands down. Nothing comes close. Why? Because we value what God values, and we go by God's design, and that's why Christianity works really well and helps a lot of people, whereas other things just there's a lot of problems with other views. Okay, so. A theist views an act of compassion as an absolute obligation imposed by God, which has intrinsic value regardless of the consequences. There's also a gulf between worldview with regard to the nature of values. For a theist, God has endowed certain things, human life, for example, with ultimate value. It's sacred because God made it in His image. Okay, so in summary, reality is either the universe only. Okay, this is a really important summary here because it encompasses all the worldviews and again shows how coherent Christianity is. But reality is either the universe only, God only, or the universe and God or gods. If the universe is all that exists, then atheism is right. If God is all that exists, then pantheism is right. If God and the universe exist, then either there is one God or many gods. If there are many gods, polytheism is right. If there is only one God, then this God is either finite or infinite. If there is one finite God, then finite, that should be with one O. Godish is correct. Finite Godism. Okay, not goatish, goodish. Finite goodish. Sounds like a dish at a restaurant. No, that should be goatism. So that's Godism is correct. If the finite God has two poles, one beyond and one in the world, then panentheism is right. And if there is one infinite God, then either there is intervention of this God in the universe or there is not. If there is intervention, then theism is true. If there's not, then deism is true. So try to memorize that this week. You'll have all your worldviews down. Okay? Okay, so let's look at the chart on the back, and then we'll talk about this stuff. Again, so we looked at atheism, deism, theism last week in the same chart. And again, if you didn't get that, there's some extras there. If there's no more left, just tell me and I'll email it to you. But you have the view on the left column, God, the world, God in the world, miracles, human nature, human destiny, evil, basis of ethics, nature of ethics, history and its goal, and then some proponents of these different views. Okay, so finite Godism, which probably most of you have never even heard of, and this would definitely be the least held view. As a matter of fact, I've never met anybody that holds this view, but we'll go through it quickly anyway. So what they believe is that there's one finite God beyond and in the world. So God is very limited. The world is created ex nihilo or ex materia. So I guess they would debate on that. God in the world is limited in his nature, and it runs by natural laws. There's no miracles. They don't believe in miracles. Human nature, humans are created by God through evolution. So they would be theistic evolutionists. Human destiny, there's really no consensus on this. Evil, that God is powerless over evil. Okay, so pretty lame God. Basis of ethics, there really is no consensus. Nature of ethics is relative. History and its goal, it's linear, purposeful, eternal. Proponents, Plato. Okay, so Plato held to this. Henry Wyman, John Stuart Mill, Edgar Brightman, and Peter Bertocci. Okay, so those would be some. But again, you're not likely to run into too many of these people. I never have personally. Has anybody ever talked to anybody that holds this?
No, what group is this?
Well, again, here's some of these. I guess modern day Platonists, you know. The Platonic Society. No, not Platonic. Anyway, okay. Then there's panentheism. And again, this is where we get open theists, like Greg Boyd. So you could put Greg Boyd down there. But panentheists believe that God is finite and in process. God is changing. Okay? This is where all progressive Christians get their theology. Okay? It derives from that God is in process, and thus truth is in process. Everything is in process. And so it's really a socialized Darwinism of religion, is what it is. Anyway, the horrible thing about this, and I don't understand it, is why so many Christian publishing houses publish this stuff. Because it is, I think it's anti-Christian. It's not just unchristian and heretical, it's anti-Christian. And yet, IVP publishes this stuff. And I periodically will write IVP, like probably once a year. I write them a letter and just hammer them on this issue and say, why are you publishing Greg Boyd?
They want to make money.
You know?
Do they respond?
They do, but it's a generic response. Just like the LA Dodgers generic response to me. But again, this is the direction they've chosen to go, and you're right, it's about money. It's about money. It's also a compromise of the gospel. They're not so concerned about the gospel. They're concerned about being liked on campus.
Yikes.
Yep.
So they're totally into the whole woke thing. Talk to Scott about this. Scott's been interacting with them for a while. Yeah, so again, this stuff is just rampant all around us. But this to me is incredibly troubling because there are churches in Marin that hold to this view. Churches that are so-called evangelical churches. And I wish they would tell people what they really are. Okay, so they believe that the world is created ex materia and ex deo and eternal. So it's sort of a hodgepodge of deism, pantheism, and this whole process theology as well. They would say about God in the world that God is dependent on the world. He's not sovereign over the world, but he's dependent on the world. They think miracles are impossible. Human nature is personal and free. We are co-creators with God and of God. Human destiny, we live forever in God's memory. Evil, there's no consensus on evil. Basis of ethics, no standard of value, because again, everything's changing. It's in process. Basis of nature of ethics, relative. History and its goal, linear, purposeful, eternal. Again, G.W.F. Hegel would be the primary popularizer of this. Hegelian dialectic.
Yeah.
Alfred North Whitehead would be the primary popularizer of process theology, from where this comes. Charles Hartshorne, and Schubert Ogden, and again, you could write Greg Boyd down there as well. Okay, pantheism. Again, the most widely held view in Marin County. God is one, infinite, personal, or impersonal. The world is created ex deo, so it comes out of or emanates from God, and it's immaterial. God and the universe are one. Miracles are impossible. Human nature is either absolutely unreal or less real than God. Human destiny is to overcome ignorance and realize that you are God. Okay? Shirley MacLaine, famous statement, I am God. That's a pantheistic statement, as if there was one. Evil's an illusion. Okay? It's just a fig Newton of your imagination until you kick them in the shins. Basis of ethics, strive to live morally. Nature of ethics, relative. History and its goal is circular, illusory, and eternal. Who is a proponent of this? Hindus, many Buddhists, Christian Science, unity, and Scientology. Okay? And again, most Marinites, they like pantheism because you can do yoga and you're spiritual because you're doing yoga. You don't have to go to church, but you're getting, you're becoming one with the universe and you feel all spiritual. Yeah, Tyron.
Just New Age would be in here.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. New Age as well. Yeah. Okay, then polytheism. And where polytheism would be most held would be in Utah because of the Mormons and any of the Polynesian islands. The Polynesian islands, if you're a native to those islands, you're either a Christian or you're a polytheist. And the reason you're a Christian, there are a lot of Christians in Polynesia because a lot of missionaries went to the Polynesian islands. As a matter of fact, Tahiti, I'm antsy to talk to Brian and Joy because they went to Tahiti on their honeymoon, but Tahiti has the highest percentage of Christians per capita in the whole world. Something like 95% of the people who live in Tahiti. That it might correlate to the fact that that's anybody who's been to Tahiti said it's the best place to go. Might have something to do with the fact that it's primarily Christian. But yeah, so again, the Polynesian Islands and Utah would be loaded with polytheists. Okay, so what do they believe? That God is multiple. There are thousands, many gods. As a matter of fact, the goal of a Mormon is to become God, to become a God. That's the goal of every Mormon who knows their stuff. Their doctrine is just like Jesus. Jesus is the God of this planet. And in eternity, you will be, if you're a good Mormon, you'll be the God of another planet. That's their destiny, okay, for Mormons. The world is created ex materia. It's eternal. There are many finite gods that exist in the world. And they're finite because they're created. Human nature do not possess the gods, but are possessed by the gods, which is pretty scary. Because I think that makes the case right there for the fact that they're demonic. Moroni, who appeared to Joseph Smith, and I really believe that he did appear to Joseph Smith, I believe was a demon. And perhaps one of like kind also appeared to Muhammad. In both cases, they described those demons as angels of light, which is how Satan comes. Okay, so anyway, human destiny to incarnate the gods and celebrate them. Evil is either or concepts. Basics of ethics are in harmony with whatever gods they are worshiping. Nature of ethics is relative. History and its goal is linear or circular, purposeful, and eternal. Proponents And this is interesting that Mormonism is in line with witchcraft and Wicca. So there you have it. So we've looked at all the major worldviews in the last 2 weeks. And next week we'll spend a little bit more time evaluating these, and then how do we share the gospel with these different groups. And in particular, we're going to be looking at groups that we're the most likely to share the gospel with. So we'll look at, you're likely to encounter a Mormon in Marin. You're likely to encounter another theist that would be a Catholic, but they have a different gospel. So you need to know how to speak to Catholics, how to share the gospel with Catholics. You're going to run into Jews who are also theists, but again, they don't believe in the Trinity or the New Testament or that Jesus is the Messiah. So in other words, we're going to be talking about some Jehovah's Witnesses, different types of New Agers, Hindus, Buddhists, and so forth. So in the weeks to come, we're going to take these different groups and go, what do they believe in a nutshell, and how do we share the gospel with them? Yeah.
You've heard of Richard Rohr.
Yeah.
Would he be under the panentheism?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, he's a process theologian. And in process theology precedes open theism. Open theism is sort of the new version. So it'd be like when we talk about neo-Marxism. It's the same as Marxism, but the approach is a little bit different. What always happens is you always try to make something that's so blatantly heretical sound better. So Mormons will talk about that we're saved by grace, but their understanding of grace is radically different than biblical grace. They'll say that they're saved by faith alone, but their understanding of faith alone. Again, and so those are the types of things that we're going to be pressing in on. Especially, we're going to focus on how do they understand salvation, because that's the most important thing. There's all kinds of periphery issues that all these groups believe in that, again, honestly, who cares? Because if you don't get the gospel right, there's no use talking about the rest of the stuff. It's, again, hone in on Jesus and how are you saved. So that's primarily what we're going to be looking at, is how do these people view salvation, and how is that contrary to the Bible's teaching? And then how do we get to first base with these people? So I'll be, again, we're going to be looking at these different groups in weeks to come. And I would say again, keep these in a file, because I have this I remember one time I was preaching through John, and I had somebody in the back row of my church in San Diego, and I saw them fall asleep halfway through the sermon. And it's a young person. And they fell asleep, and it really irritated me. And then that week, a Jehovah's Witness came to their door, and they called me up and said, "There's a Jehovah's Witness at the door. I need help." And I'm like, well, you would have got it on Sunday if you didn't fall asleep in the service. And I was not gracious or merciful to this person. It really ticked me off. And that happens all the time. It happens all the time in this church. People will email me on something I just talked about in Deeper Dive, Sunday theology class. Every week this happens. And they'll say, "How do I deal with this person?" And I'll say, well, instead of watching TV, 60 minutes for 60 minutes, why not come to Deeper Dive for 60 minutes? So anyway, it's a pet peeve of mine that we offer. Everything we're doing here is to help you understand the gospel, proclaim the gospel, deal with people out there in the world, in the real-time world. That's what we're doing all the time. That's why we get together, to help each other in this. And people just don't care. So anyway, that's a pet peeve of mine. But thank you all for being here, and for none of you being asleep right now. There's always people that text me and they say, "I'm sorry, I fell asleep in church." Fortunately, my vision's so bad now I don't see it anymore. But they'll confess. I just this last week somebody said, "I'm so sorry, I keep falling asleep in church," and And they said they have some kind of sleep problem or whatever. And I said, oh, it's okay. Hopefully you're getting good rest. And I was able to be nice about it. But anyway.
You could suggest in your cup of coffee.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I could only have 1 cup of coffee. I've cut back to 1 cup per day.
You mentioned Mormonism.
Yeah.
And Muhammad, there's also right now endorsed by Bethel, the Passion Bible.
Yeah.
And Simmons has also been visited by an angel named Passion.
Right.
And it's difficult in trying to talk to a Christian why it's not a good idea to be reading that Bible. And I gave all of the information, and the person said, but it expands my... And I said, it's not expanding it, it's making it into mud. And then at another church that I was attending, one of the pastors, who was a woman, used the Passion. I couldn't believe it, so I called up the head pastor. I said, do you know what this Bible is? And he said, no. And I said, well, let me tell you. And I told him. And I said, now, I need you to go and look this up.
Yeah.
And he did. And he said, oh, my gosh. And he
Yeah.
told the woman never to use that again. And the lady said,
Right.
oh, I didn't know.
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh. It's
Yeah.
like, what are you doing?
Yeah, and again, it's almost impossible to keep up with all the heresy out there. But I'm glad you bring that up. I'm glad you bring it up. And again, a lot of people get mad at me. It's like, why do you pick on people so much? And it's like, because they're public and they're teaching heresy.
Yeah.
And I have to warn people, because if you start following that person, you can be led away. I mean, it's, again, a pastor, the Greek word means shepherd. And so, how does a good shepherd shepherd his flock? You keep them away from wolves. You don't go, oh, there's a bunch of wolves. Oh, why don't you go play over there a little bit with the wolves? The wolves will eat you, okay? And that's why I take theology seriously, because, again, if you start buying into this stuff, before you know it, you're reading their stuff, you're buying into their false teaching.
Richard Rohr.
Exactly. And that happens all the time. And so there's a ton of Christians that are deconstructing their faith under the teaching of these people. So that's why I do call these people out. Michael W. Smith approved it. Apparently he recanted of this, but again, it's just amazing how many people will condone something like the Passion or Bethel. Again, I can't be the only watchdog. There's just too much going on. But I have to do it with our own music. If I see Hillsong up there, I have to tell Lynn, let's not do any Hillsong stuff. If I see Bethel, let's not do any Bethel stuff. If I see Elevation, let's not do any Elevation stuff. If I see Jesus Culture, let's not do any Jesus Culture stuff. But, again, a lot of this stuff is good, and there's truth in it. But the problem is, if we get somebody who comes and sees Bethel on our screen, and then Bethel condones Passion, and so they start reading the Passion Bible, and the Passion Bible has a lot of heresy in it. I mean, not just some heresy, a lot of heresy. And again, if you watch David Simmons, I guess his name, what's his name?
Brian Simmons.
Brian Simmons. If you watch Brian Simmons, and you've been going to our church for less than a year, you're going to see right away red flags all over the place. And again, there's a lot of these people that put their foot in these different areas where that foot shouldn't go, and it gives Satan a foothold. So yeah, that's why we call these things out. But I'm glad you brought that up, because again, apparently, I just recently found, from Scott, actually Scott's the one who told me about the Passion Bible and that Bethel condones it and so forth. So if you have a Passion Bible, burn it. Seriously. Just burn it. Use it for, if anybody here needs kindling, just raise your hand, and if you have the Passion Bible, give it to them. And I find that heretical books make great kindling. I really miss having a fireplace, because Joel Steen had his day in there, and a lot of other people that I would burn their books. It was a lot of fun. but I don't have a fireplace anymore,
I
unfortunately.
never heard of the Passion Bible. How long has it been out there?
I don't know. Scott knows more about it than me.
And it's not even completely translated yet. He's
Right.
done the New Testament and Psalms and Proverbs. It's not the complete Bible. But what's interesting, if you compare, let's say the Passion New Testament versus the New Testament of either King James or any of the respectable translations, ESV, the Passion is about 50% longer.
What?
Because of how much stuff it's put
Yeah.
in, he adds into it.
Goodness.
It's stunning. There's a guy named now semi-Pelagian alert. Just so you know.
Oh, is it Winger?
Mike Winger.
Yeah.
He did a big. He's charismatic actually, and he finds Bethel to be
Yeah.
very problematic.
That's where I got my background on
Yeah.
Simmons through him, and then
Yeah.
hearing all of the translators of the NIV
Yeah.
talk about how this guy is not a translator.
Yeah,
Right.
So Brian Simmons has very much exaggerated his qualifications to do Bible
Yeah.
translation.
Yeah.
And then he also, because so that you won't question him, he says that he has been personally ordained by Jesus
Right.
himself
That
to,
was
to,
scary.
to
That's
do this
serious.
translation. That he was
Wow.
taken up into the library of heaven.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And but he's so that's
And he got to bring back 2 books from heaven.
But I want to add something though that's very important too. That he said that there was another thing that he was told that he could have, but just not yet, which is a 22nd chapter of the book of John.
Yeah, it's called John 22.
John 22.
Yeah.
He's not allowed to reveal that yet.
Right.
There's only 21.
But there's only 21 chapters in
Yeah.
the book of John. So
Yeah.
Jesus
What's the
gave
end
him,
of
but
the
he's just
Bible
not allowed to
say?
reveal it. So this
And he was
is.
sinful and wanting to steal this and have it.
Yeah, he said he wanted to steal it.
It is so bad. Like I had a lot of issues with it. I actually went to a Bethel service and there were all kind of alarm bells going off for me. But hearing about the Passion Translation, more alarm bells, and I came across this guy, Mike Winger, and he did this massive expose on the Passion Translation. He hired
Yeah.
some of the great translation experts
Yeah.
and had them, he just sent them a copy of like say Galatians, and he found the guy who's like one of the leading experts on translating Galatians. He hired people like Blomberg,
Craig Blomberg.
and just didn't tell them much about like, what do you think about this translation? They would come back and like, this is just utter rubbish.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
This has nothing to do with the Greek. It just ripping it to shreds. And so
Yeah.
there's a lot of problems.
Yeah. And the lead pastor of Bethel, sings his praises of the Passion.
Well, and apparently that's the fastest growing translation in the U.S.
Yeah.
I think Mike Winger mentions that.
Yeah, we're just
It's
getting-
growing really, really fast. People are taking
Yeah.
because it appeals to. Well, it's interesting. One of the words that he inserts, which you won't find anywhere in any of the major translations, is the word activate. You won't find that anywhere. And he inserts it at least 6 or 7 times in the New Testament. And coincidentally, Brian Simmons has a whole series of books that you could purchase on how to activate your spiritual gifts.
Yeah.
And so it's so.
Yeah, he's making a lot of money on this.
Yes, it's
Yeah.
so insidious.
Can't spend it in hell, though.
People are falling in love. They're falling in love with the miracles of Jesus, and they're not falling in love with Jesus. You know, and they love his power. They love the goodies that they think they can get. And it's nothing about repentance.
Right.
And that Jesus is saving us from our own sin, and it's becoming essentially just another new world or new age religion.
Yeah.
Jesus is just another guru.
Yeah. It's very, very dangerous.
Very dangerous.
And again, those of you who listen to contemporary Christian music, I just want to warn you that a lot of the music you're listening to is false doctrine. Okay, if you listen to K-Love, which I think is the biggest music player in Marin, anyway, or in the Bay Area, just be careful, okay? Because again, it could be a good tune, have great solos and voices and beat and rhythm and whatever. Most scholars believe that Satan was the worship leader of heaven.
Yeah.
Okay, so music is a way that really penetrates culture, and again, this is why it's so important to study theology, to know your Bible, you know, to be constantly in the truth, because there's even the Christian music stations and the Christian churches and the Christian leaders that are selling millions of copies of their books. Many of those are heretics today. And that's a lie. That's the worst thing you can do is call somebody a heretic, you know, I mean, but, well, I'm not going to stop. If they're a heretic, they've earned the right or the wrong to be called that. And again, show me where in the scriptures you see this. And it's just, you know, I can't keep up with it. So thanks for bringing, you know, please bring this stuff up because I can't keep up with all this stuff. But yeah. And again, if you know people that are seduced by people like Joel Osteen or Bethel or whatever, that's what this class is for, to prepare you to give answers and reasons to these people. We may even take a whole thing on Bethel, just because so many people are influenced by them, because they're close to, you know, they're here in Reading, and a lot of people are influenced by them. Their music is huge. I mean, they make millions on their music. And again, when you do Bethel music, you're paying heretics. That's what you're doing. So that's why I don't want to do anything with Bethel. Okay? So anyway, Hillsong, same thing. You know, Hillsong is huge. They make millions. And all these people are, in my opinion, they have heretical teaching, and their lifestyles are not very, they're not lifestyles. The pastors of the churches, they're not lifestyles I would want to follow, okay, as a Christian. So anyway, it's very sad. But fortunately, there's people out there like John MacArthur and others that are still standing firm.
Is there any contemporary musicians that you do recommend?
Cole Porter.
Not current.
I don't follow enough because there's so much bad music that I just don't follow it much anymore.
Well, like
So I can go back to the 80s and 90s and 2000. I don't follow anyone anymore. Again, I think most music is one of the things I don't like about contemporary music is it's very emotional. It's very emotive. I like older stuff primarily because it's very theological. It's about God. What a lot of contemporary is singing to God about my feelings. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but if I had it my way, again, we would do more hymns than modern stuff. Just because hymns, and again, there's crummy hymns too. Okay. There's really crummy theology in some famous hymns. But there's some really good ones too. And again, in general, people used to be more theological when they wrote, so that's why there's a lot of old stuff that's better than new stuff. But I would recommend, like, one organization I wish we'd sing more of their stuff is Sovereign Grace. Sovereign Grace is very good. As a matter of fact, I don't know of a Sovereign Grace song that isn't good, and it's like modern hymns. It's contemporary. It's written in a contemporary way, but the lyrics are like hymns. So anything Sovereign Grace. I think the Gettys are very solid.
Did I send you that thing about the Sing Conference?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. The Sing Conference that's happening Labor Day weekend in Nashville. It's sponsored by the Gettys.
Yeah.
I would love to go.
Yeah, so the Gettys, Kristen, and what's his name? Kristen.
Is it Paul?
Anyway, the Gettys write a lot of modern stuff. We sing some of their stuff. They're very solid, theologically. Yeah. But again, there's a lot of stuff there's a lot of people that used to be pretty good that aren't that great anymore. Again, because progressive Christianity has sort of infiltrated everything, including music. So, but I'm not an expert on modern music. I just sort of, I guess I understand why a lot of our grandparents and parents were so down on contemporary stuff, because I'm the same way now. But again, I look at the theology of stuff and I'm going, that is really lame. And in some cases, it's not only lame, it's like, that's false.
Yeah.
That's just not even true.
Over and over in your
Yeah.
head.
Bill Johnson, in one of the interviews I saw, he talks about how Bethel, why music is so important to Bethel. And I'm paraphrasing, I'm not quoting, but it's something to the effect of music can help prepare people to their minds to accept something they wouldn't otherwise be able to accept. And of course,
That could be for good or
and that could be for good or bad.
Yeah.
And in their case, inserting a lot of New Age false teaching.
Yeah. Good. So again, I mean, keep your eyes peeled. Don't buy books or music that you're not sure of. Don't give your money to it. Even somebody in our church that is pretty solid just recently bought a book and told me about it. And I said, why did you waste your money on that book? And when he told me the name of the person, I said, why did you buy that? Why didn't you ask me? Because this person is a bona fide heretic, and they wasted, $15 on a book.
They can burn it.
Yeah, I guess it's good for the fireplace, but you can get cheaper kindling, Yeah, I mean, again, there's too much, and that's one of the reasons why I'm glad we have a resource library. You can trust every book that we pick in the resource library is solid theologically, okay? It's good stuff. I don't want you to waste your time on garbage. And again, I'll waste my time on the heresies and warn you about them so you don't have to. But again, we have to do that because there's a lot of wolves out there. There's more wolves than sheep. And unfortunately, most of them are leading so-called Christian organizations. Okay, other questions on worldview and what we talked, again, any of these different worldviews that we've looked at today?
Well, I wanted to say something about, sometimes I've engaged someone in the claim to be a Christian, maybe they are, I don't know, but and talk about these kinds of things, concerns about, and they say I'm being divisive, and it just, but then I responded recently to someone, I said, well, why is it that I'm the one that's being divisive? Why aren't people calling out those who are inserting these progressive ideas into the church as the ones who are being divisive? Instead, when we try to push back against her being divisive, and isn't that an interesting sort of missing that?
Yeah.
We're trying to protect orthodoxy.
Yeah. And I think Jesus, again, I would point anybody who says that to Jesus, because Jesus, the most controversy that Jesus had was with the Pharisees, who were the religious leaders of the day. And what he was typically calling them on was adding things to the scripture, adding their traditions, for example. And that's what these people are doing. Because again, they probably wouldn't put it this way, but the way they think is he's in process. So morals are changing, standards are changing. So that's why there are gay pastors who identify as gay Christians or gay pastors. Well, that was unheard of 60 years ago. I mean, you just wouldn't do that. You'd literally be thrown out of a church if you even said such a thing. Well, why are there so many churches that are like that now? I mean, thousands. They're in the thousands. They're not just in the hundreds. They're in the thousands in America alone. Well, that is a progressive idea that says that God's in process, that it was a different time. They didn't understand love is love back then. And those are the kinds of things they say. You listen to a progressive theologian can be annihilated by an 8-year-old that knows their Bible today, because their interpretation is so bad. There's so much eisegesis involved. Taking it, they completely take it out of context. But they can get away with it because they're surrounded with people that agree with them, because they love their sin. So you get a bunch of people that love to sin. What are they going to do? They're going to sin. Bad company corrupts good morals. So if you get people where their agenda is to be pro-gay as a church, they're going to attract pro-gay people. That's the church across the street from us is going to attract pro-gay people. I don't even know why somebody who's not gay would want to go there. Because you're just going to, every Sunday, you're going to get hammered on how great being gay is. It's not a biblical message, it's a cultural message that abuses the scriptures for their agenda.
How is that church going to continue? Because being gay, you're never going to have offspring. There's no next generation of that.
Well, that's why they're going after children. That's indoctrination.
Yeah, Bidenomics.
Continued indoctrination.
Yeah.
Yeah. which again will continue and continue. And again, fortunately, there's a lot of people standing up and standing out, but we need more. There needs to be more. Yeah. But yeah, Scott, I think, yeah, you're going to get, and I know people have said, don't judge. People throw that out all the time. And again, there's always scripture to back us up. But again, my focus, what I hone in on with these people is what is the gospel. And if they don't use repentance in their explanation of the gospel, then they believe in a false gospel. And if they don't, if they add any work, any of their own works, or any of their own morals, or any of their own standards to the gospel, that's not the gospel. So in other words, you want to listen to what their explanation of get them back to the gospel. And in every single one of these people we're talking about, they've gotten away from the gospel. There's something else that's drawing people to them. And it's usually their false teaching that's drawing people to them. It's something they're not getting in a church like ours. Where, you mean I can actually fornicate and be a Christian? I want to go to that church. And a lot of there are a lot of churches today they're nightclubs and bars now. Yeah. Literally. Yeah. They have their service at night, and it's a nightclub. Wow. And it's a pickup joint. That's a church. This is going on in every major city in the United States. Wow. It's happening. This is real. This isn't, you'd think it was whooped up and, wow, there's people that actually, yes, there are. But again, where does that come from? A false gospel. Because what we teach here, and I teach this very firmly, I will not back down on this, that Jesus is not your Savior if He's not your Lord.
Amen.
If He's not your Lord, He's not your Savior. You have not repented. You're still living for idols. And so the first step of the gospel is you have to repudiate and repent of your worship of all the idols in your life, whatever they are. And until you do that, I don't think you're saved. Now, I'm going against the flow of culture, but I think I can back that up biblically. I think Jesus did that. I think Paul did that. I think Peter did that. I think all the prophets did that. They addressed idolatry. They addressed sin. Jesus forgave people, but He said, go and sin no more. And that's the missing element today. It's like you can have your sin and Jesus, and it's like, no, you can't. No, you can't. Don't tell me you're a Christian if you love your sin more than Jesus.
And He gave us the power to overcome the sin and
right.
Too, with the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
When I was in college, before I was a believer, when I was looking at different religions, I remember going through and like, okay, which one is okay with premarital sex? I want that one.
Yeah.
I was reading like, this one? Oh, no, okay, no, I don't want that one.
Yeah. So again, if you grow up in a totally sexualized culture like ours is, and you go off to college, and every college town has progressive churches now, and you go there and you can do whatever you want sexually, and it's okay. Well, I'm telling you, man, if all those people, if the rapture came, those churches would be full. There are people that think they're saved because they're getting a false gospel. Well, that's on the leaders. That's on the pastors. And I do not want to be in their shoes on Judgment Day. It's going to be hard enough to be in my shoes on Judgment Day. Okay? Because teachers have a stricter judgment. I take that very seriously. I mean, it really does scare me that there may be things I'm teaching that aren't true. That's terrifying to me. And that's why I study so much. Because if I'm leading anybody astray, man alive, better a millstone be around my neck. So I take that seriously. Very seriously.
That's what makes good pastors. They're more afraid of God than the congregation.
That's right.
Yeah. But we can't back down. Again, unfortunately, too many people pussyfoot around these issues with supposed Christians, and I don't think we can back down. But again, we have we have the Bible on our side, you know. Because again, Paul dealt with heresy, Jesus dealt with heresy, they all dealt with heresy. So if you're going to say, who are you, as a Christian, who are you following? Christ. Well, if I'm following Christ, that means I'm going to be like him. What did he do? Well, one of the things he did is he protected his disciples from wolves. And that's what we need to do. Is it divisive? Yes. If you have, all these worldviews contradict each other. That's why a religion like Baha'i is fine until you disagree with whatever they believe. You know, they say that God manifested himself in all these people. Well, if he manifested himself in Jesus, and Jesus said, I'm the only way, then that's a contradiction from all these other ways you say. Yeah.
I was part of an Episcopalian church.
Uh-huh.
I used to teach Baha'i, and the pastor of the church thought it was wonderful.
Yeah. That's not too surprising. Yeah. Yeah. And again, so the liberal mainline church, the mainline churches, Episcopal Church, Presbyterian, especially USA, United Methodist, the Lutheran Church in America, all these churches have gone what we call liberal. And what that means is essentially the pastors of those churches or the denominational leaders of those churches theologically started teaching that the Bible is not infallible, that it has errors. So once you start doing that, now you can pick and choose what you want out of the Bible. Since it's not all infallible, then how do we know what's infallible and not? And so then they can pick and choose. Then what happens is it becomes easy to adapt to the morals of culture because we don't want to offend people. After all, we need to pay the bills.
Right.
We need bodies in the seats, and we need to pay the bills. And so again, like you said, it's true. A lot of these liberal pastors and progressive pastors, it really is about pleasing man. It's not about pleasing God at all. It's about pleasing man. They're not in it for God. They're in it for, honestly, their ego and how they can please man. And every single, and again, that's why with religious people, I don't emphasize sins of commission. Stealing. Right. And again, I know Ray Comfort does that. I usually, with somebody from another religion, what I emphasize is their sin of omission. And that is how you have not given glory to God. Because even what you're doing today, if they're a Mormon or they're a Catholic or they're a Jew or whatever they are, they're basing their relationship with God on their works. That's your ego. That's your pride. And do you know that God hates that? Can I take you over to Proverbs and see what God hates most? That's what I do. That's the tactic I take. And oftentimes it's the first time they've ever been called on that. Because it's easy to say, for most people, we wouldn't own up to, again, not in the way that the Old Testament says murder, but if we are looking at the words of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, we would all be murderers. Every single one of us has murdered somebody on the road at some point in our mind. And if you haven't, well, wow, what an amazing person you are. But you probably murdered somebody somewhere else, The reality is, again, our sin is multifaceted, it's blatant, it's bigger than we think it is. It has more of a control of it. But I think what a lot of people don't get is the biggest problem I have is I've put myself in the place of God. I'm doing what I'm doing because I love me so much. Now, they wouldn't say that. But any religious person, that's exactly what they're doing. Because they're basing their salvation on their works. And in order to do that, you have to think of yourself more highly than you really are, especially in comparison to God. So that's the tactic I take with people from any religion, is I hammer on the glory of God, the holiness of God, the awesomeness of God, and compare yourself with that. And if you're not humbled by that and say, man, there's no hope for me. There's absolutely no hope for me. Until you realize there's no hope for you, you're not even going to want the gospel. Because I can do it. I can do it myself. If I just do this, if I just do that, and then it's on you. It's your ego. It's your pride. And that's why God hates pride. I think a big reason God hates pride is because it keeps people from having a relationship with him. They're just using him for their own glory.
I've heard the most hated doctrine is we're not good.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, people.
Don't like to be told.
Yeah, people get really upset about Jesus being the only way, you know. In our life group this week, somebody was talking about that they have a friend that just was irate with her. How could you say such a thing? How hateful of you, how narrow of you, and it's like, well, you're going to have to take it up with Jesus. Okay, I didn't make this up. He's somebody who's, but again, when you look at why it needs to be Jesus, it's because we're a lot worse than we thought.
So when you're engaging with people in this context, you're really, hopefully, your heart is to rescue.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And so it's not an attack on them. It's compassionate.
Well, it's both. I mean, they feel like it's an attack.
Yeah.
Whenever you attack.
My default would be to attack.
Yeah.
I try to argue.
And again, it is very challenging. And again, that's why I like to know somebody fairly well when you get to this, because you've already shown that you care for them. But then you're saying, why would I risk our relationship by even bringing this up?
That's a good way to put it.
That
is really good.
But again, if this is true, and I believe it is, I believe there's plenty of evidence to show that this is true. And so I'm willing to die for this. I really am willing to die for this because I believe it's true. Well, if I was in your shoes, I would want desperately for somebody like me to be talking to you the way I'm talking to you now.
That really rings a bell for me, because that's the biggest, I think, as I hear that, the risk. Why am I going to, because I have a lot of relationships.
Yeah.
And when you stick your neck out, you're risking that relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it could be financial, it could be familial.
Yeah. But again, I couch it in those terms. The reason I'm sharing this with you is because I care about you. I love you. If I was just telling you, hey, believe whatever you want to believe, well, for one, that would be me slapping Jesus in the face. Yeah. Okay? Because he died for my sins. He took the punishment and I believe that reality can be true for you, but you have to accept it. You have to believe this yourself. So you want to hear some reasons why I believe this and why I'm willing to risk my relationship with you over this.
I'm going to use that phrase.
Yeah.
On that question.
Yeah.
That's really.
Yeah.
Would be.
And again,
personal. I mean.
And I've used this. I've talked about this a lot, but I've used this with several atheists on their deathbed.
Yeah.
Who have come to faith in the last day and the last hour. But again, I'm like, why do you think I haven't eaten for 3 days? You think I haven't eaten for 3 days because I hate you? I mean, I missed out. I remember with this one particular, I missed out. A lady made lemon meringue pie for me, and I can't eat it, and it's not even going to be that good because it's been sitting for 3 days. Why would I do that? I'm telling you, man. If I wasn't a Christian, that pie'd be gone. I would have eaten that pie in 1 day.
You were fasting and praying.
I was fasting for him. I'm saying I'm fasting for you because right now you're on your way to hell. Why am I doing that? Because I love you, because I care about it. Why would I be here? I'd be at home eating my meringue pie. And at the time, I would have been watching the Dodgers, too. A double waste of time, But again, I think that's the thing, is people don't think it's that serious because they don't think it's true. And that's why we need good reasons to give them of why we're staking our life on this thing. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I'm not going to be able to share this very well because it's been several years since I saw it, but just just kind of along these lines, I remember a video I saw, clip with Penn Jillette, you know, the magician, Penn and Teller. And at least at the time, he was an atheist, and he was just telling a story about a man who had come to a show and like brought him a Bible or something like that, and he ended up having a conversation with him after, and the gentleman was, you know, sort of explaining to him this idea of like, you know, well, if I saw a train coming towards you and I didn't push you out of the way, it was, you know, something along those lines or
Right.
whatever.
It's a good one.
But it was so powerful for him,
Right.
Penn Jillette, that like years later, he's still telling people the story as an atheist.
Yeah.
About remembering this guy who was so important to him that, you know, because he cared about people, that even if it never changed what he believed,
Yeah.
you know, that stuck with him, and he was telling other people, like he's almost evangelizing
Yeah.
as an atheist.
Yeah.
Because the guy just, you know, the stand he took was so impactful on him.
Yeah. That's great. There's a great, I wish I could find it. I keep looking for it and I can't find it. But there's a true illustration. And when I was in Australia before COVID, thank God we went to Australia and New Zealand when we did, because it was right before COVID. But I was walking on George Street, and George Street it leads up to where the Opera House is. So it's a famous street in Sydney. And but there's a story, and I heard Josh McDowell talk about it once, and it was of a street preacher who regularly would preach on George Street, but never saw any fruit. I mean, he never had anybody come up to him and say, I want to repent of my sins and put my trust in Christ. Well, this same guy, because again, I don't remember all the details, so I'm just telling you sort of the gist of what happened. So here's a guy he's the guy who would preach was on his deathbed, and he was somewhere in Australia, and the person that was caring for him said, he was telling him about this, and he was very sad, and he said, you know, I spent so much of my life preaching on the street, and nobody ever gave their life to Christ, and here I'm going to die, and I feel like I've wasted my life. Well, the nurse who was taking care of him started crying, and she said, you know what, my dad was on George Street in she said the date and the time, and she heard this guy, and he was talking about that. Do you think that was you? And she described what he looked like and the sign that he had. He said, yeah, that was definitely me. And she said he came home and he realized that he was a sinner, he needed Jesus and the whole thing. Well, he prayed to receive Christ, and I was a little girl at the time, and the next Sunday, we all got dressed and we went to church. And we found a church that that taught the Bible and everything. So I became a Christian, my brother became a Christian, my mom became a Christian, all because my dad heard you preach.
It's a miracle.
And I wish I could find, if you read anywhere where you find this story, it's a true story. I've heard Josh McDowell tell it, but it's in one of his books, and I have, I think, all of his books, but I keep trying to find it. I can't find it. But that's the thing. We don't know. You know, we're seed planters, but we don't know what God's going to use to bring somebody to himself. We don't know how many seeds already that we've planted in people's lives where they're Christians now. And we're going to see those people in heaven. I honestly think that one of the things that we're going to do in the first probably million years is just telling these stories. You know, where you're going to go up to somebody who prayed for you, a Sunday school teacher who taught you the gospel, a mom, a grandma, you know, that prayed for you. I mean, we're going to run into all these people, and we're going to see how all these things are interconnected. And the means that God saves people sovereignly, but he uses the means of us witnessing and our prayers. That's mysterious. I don't know how he does that, but he does. And we're going to get to see that. And it's just going to be a beautiful thing. I mean, it's just absolutely beautiful. But like what happened to that guy on George Street, I think is going to happen to all of us. You know, the people are going to be there because God used us in that process. And that's a great hope to have, you know.